With Bob Huggins in attendance to watch both of his former teams, the West Virginia Mountaineers get their third Big 12 victory, a much needed win, a home win at the Coliseum over the Cincinnati Bearcats. West Virginia wins it 69-65. This is our WVU basketball postgame show. I'm Mike Asti, and I will be joined by our men's basketball beat writer, Ethan Bock, who is at the Coliseum and covered the game on location, as he will join me to discuss this game, how West Virginia won this game, because it was a weird, ugly gameplay, despite all the intrigue. I don't know how interesting it really was, but for a side note, which we'll get into, this was the very first game that the legit starting lineup that they re-recruited and were supposed to have all year, barring everything that's gone on with the NCAA and injuries, they did finally get on the floor, and it ends up being a victory. Edwards returned, of course, the other night. That was a loss, and that was him not in the starting lineup, but you get Kerkrisha, you get Battle, and you get Edwards all there, and it was really the Edwards show. They really needed him to get this win again. The Mountaineers do win it now 8-13 and 3-5 in conference play. So we now will add in Ethan Bock from the Coliseum. So, Ethan, as we were kind of talking off air as well, because I told you I almost made the trek down there to join you in the coverage of this game. Huggins going to be there as his former team. Did figure there was going to be some intrigue. Couldn't make it happen for me, but the West Virginia Mountaineers made it happen nonetheless. But it also was kind of an ugly, weird game. If you look at the box score as well as watch this game, you probably would not have figured West Virginia to win this. If you just look at the box score and don't watch the game, you're going to see West Virginia heavily out-rebounded, destroyed offensive rebounding wise, shooting not nearly enough for the Mountaineers to figure they would win this game. Nothing tells you that really free throw wise either. And it was the Edwards show with his double-double. But outside of Edwards, hot and cold for Battle. Kerkrisha had his moments, then he didn't. It was a weird game. You look at the box score, you would probably figure the Mountaineers lost this one. They do win it. They end up doing it by hanging on in that final minute and doing enough to get the win in that final minute when it looked like they almost were going to blow it at one point late as well. They kind of had to come back in the middle of this game too. So how did they get this done, and how weird of a game was this for you? Give me your analysis being there covering it, because that's just the tip of the iceberg from what I watched and from reading the box score. But at the end of the day, they got the win, and that's all that matters for this team. When they get wins, they're not going to complain about them, but what an odd game.
This was one of the oddest games I think I've ever seen in person. No rhythm could just kind of get going on both sides.
Yeah.
I thought the officials called it differently in both halves, going from not calling stuff to calling everything. It's just a dirty, or not dirty, just a gross kind of old Big East showdown.
Okay.
Just the score is a little bit higher, but
yeah,
it was just a battle, and both teams couldn't really get rhythm going. But the reason why West Virginia won, Cincinnati just shot it terribly in the final 6 minutes. Bearcats were up 60-50 with 6 minutes left, and they ended up losing by 4. So West Virginia had a nice little 19-5 run, just behind Jesse Edwards, and a big 3 by Raekwon Battle in the final minute. And they get the win. But you know what? At this point, like I said it all season. Any win is a good win for West Virginia this season.
Yeah, especially when some of the losses have been really bad losses. But speaking on the victories, as this is the third win in conference play in this bizarre season, look at these 3 wins. Against Cincinnati, always a tough competitor. It's at home, but still not a guaranteed victory in any year. Bob Huggins factor involved there, both fan bases into it. They do get the victory over Cincinnati in this weird game that we're discussing. And then a win over number 3 Kansas at the time, and at the time number 25 ranked Texas. So 2 ranked wins and a kind of a quasi old Big East rivalry win. Those are the 3 Big 12 wins. And there's bad ones
Yeah.
in there as losses that maybe should be wins. But when you think about it, with everything this team has dealt with, we talked about this before, and I feel like we're kind of a broken record. Maybe fans think we are too, but that's just the case this year. If you look back, if West Virginia would have maybe been at full strength, they probably wouldn't have lost those bye games, even though it's still unacceptable to lose those. If maybe Edwards was able to come back sooner, like he was teased a week or two ago, maybe they wouldn't have dropped some games they dropped then. Maybe they would have been better into the new year before now seeing the wins against Kansas, Texas, and what we now see against Cincinnati with the rest there mushed in the middle. And if you flip any of those swing games going on the road and playing so bad at UCF, when that should have maybe been a win coming off of a victory, as funky as this year has been and all the drama that's been involved, it's almost like there have been moments that could have led this team into the tournament, that could put this team on the bubble, that could make something out of this season, despite all of it, because we have seen what West Virginia can be and can get wins even when they're not playing their best. And yet here we are, 8-13 and 3-5 in conference play. So it does feel like it's still too little, too late. It was a guaranteed must win, and they did win it. The rest of them this year are going to be like that too, and some tough ones are going to be coming up. I want to discuss the Edwards factor now, though. 29 minutes, 25 points, 10 rebounds. You can make an argument just off of what I laid out there stat-wise. His best game was a Mountaineer, and he carried this team in the fall when everyone else was suspended, coming off the injury, sparingly off the bench. Then he gets minutes here, ends up being a starter, and without Edwards, no way does West Virginia win this game. How did he look? Was this what you were expecting from him, just watching him shoot around and being at practices, because we hadn't seen anything like this in months from him? And can you kind of paint the picture of what this game would have been without Edwards? Because 2, 3, 4 days ago, there was no guarantee of when Edwards was going to return. Without Edwards, it doesn't feel like they would have won this game and potentially would have lost by a lot.
Yeah, West Virginia doesn't win this game if Jesse Edwards is playing limited time or if he's still not back from his injury.
Yeah.
Cincinnati has a lot of length with Aziz Bandango, Victor Larkin. So without Jesse Edwards, this team doesn't win tonight. They don't get their 8th win. And I wasn't surprised by his minutes. I thought he would increase. Had 16 against Oklahoma State. Thought it would get up to 25-30 tonight, which it did at 29 minutes. But what surprised me was just his production and just seeing the growth throughout the game. Because during the first half, everybody played pretty poorly, I would say, on both teams. But Jesse kept getting fouled, kept going to the line, just what Josh Eilert worried about.
Right.
And he struggled shooting from the line, went 3 of 9. But other than that, you could see his confidence grow in the second half. He was returning to the Jesse Edwards that this Mountaineer team has seen in the first 10 games, throwing down dunks, catching lobs, getting and ones, and then finished with 25 points, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks, over 60% shooting. So definitely his best game as a Mountaineer, and in that second half definitely carried West Virginia over Cincinnati.
Especially coming off an injury, you can't ask for much more from Edwards on this night. And without Edwards, no chance for West Virginia to win this one. You mentioned the foul trouble and the concern there before he really exploded. The issue with Edwards earlier in the season, and that was when Kirk Risha was out, that was when Battle was still battling the NCAA, it was an easy scheme for the opponent. You get Edwards in foul trouble, he would sometimes get kind of in his feelings and be a hothead, and then that's it. Either he doesn't hit the free throws, potentially fouls out of a game, and then West Virginia really has no other answers, let alone bigs. They just don't have any other answers in terms of driving the offense. What do you think changed that for him and allowed him to explode in that second half after it looked like we were headed down that direction again? Because if we were headed down that direction again, and it almost seems like if I'm Cincinnati, I would have reverted back to Bob Huggins' 1990s basketball when they went to the Final Four with him in the early 90s and just banged up Edwards. If they would have done that, maybe it wouldn't work in this day and age with referees, but I wouldn't be surprised if Edwards flips out, he's out of the game, and then Cincinnati probably coasts to a win. Yeah,
there's a lot of factors, I think, between Jesse's first, second halves. second half, obviously, Cincinnati's bigs were in foul trouble. Bandango ended up fouling out. And then if you look at Edwards, he wasn't in foul trouble. So the freedom to go out, play more aggressive
Right.
in the later minutes. And plus, Cincinnati couldn't hit shots, especially from deep at the end. So West Virginia's getting a long rebound. Jesse Edwards is in transition. They find him, dunk. So pretty easy, basic play for him. Something that's not too complicated. I think in the first half they tried to force feed him in the post. His teammates did, and he just was almost forcing up shots that he wasn't going to make even without the injury. So I think it's a lot of factors, but definitely more free play, and he definitely had more confidence in the second half.
And kind of amazing that he did stay out of foul trouble, but I guess Cincinnati, yeah, when you're missing shots, you can't really go into the strategy of just trying to hack a player. They got to hit shots, and maybe the game unfolded for Edwards to dominate, and everybody else, they need to thank their lucky stars that Edwards played the way he did, or again, they probably would have lost this game regardless of who is on the floor. Ethan Bock from the Coliseum. The Mountaineers do win it 69-65, their 8th win of the year, and 3rd in conference play. And again, 2 ranked wins, and this one against the Bearcats in kind of an old Big East rivalry game in Morgantown. What a bizarre 3 wins. I don't know who had all 3 of these wins on their bingo card. If you would have been told the team's 3-5 right now in conference play, imagine these being the 3 victories. But when you have a game unfold this way, and Josh Eilert and company and that staff, they've been through the ringer, whether you like him or not, they've been through the ringer. Everyone agrees with that. And they've lost games when they felt like they played well enough to win. We've seen them go through that, and it appeared like a funeral in post-game press conferences. After this game, though, it almost feels like that West Virginia finally, quote-unquote, stole a game they otherwise probably didn't deserve to win outside of Edwards. What did the coaches say? What was the vibe, especially obviously from Josh Eilert, who you were able to speak to in the post-game presser, even any of the players, about getting this win despite not being their best, despite it being weird? Easily this could have been a game they would have lost at any other point this year, generally speaking. Was it a tone of, we won, but we really didn't play well enough to win, and I'm going to tell the guys they got to play better than this? Or were they more, we're not going to apologize for this one. We've lost games. We play better than this, so we got this win, and we're just getting the hell out of here with a victory because if we hang around any longer, we're afraid the refs are going to change their mind on the score, since that's been the kind of season they've been dealing with.
Yeah, I think a word to describe the West Virginia's players and Josh Eilert would be relieved. Just seeing I think they knew deep down that they stole this game. They didn't play their best. They would admit they didn't play their best either. But I mean, like you said, they've had a lot of bad luck in the last 6 months. So to be able to win a game they shouldn't have won, they deserve it. Kind of neutralize it out, even it out. But I think the other thing to take away is that they oddly have a sense of motivation to keep the ball rolling. And I say oddly only because you go into this game 7-13. You haven't won a single game outside of Morgantown.
Right.
Josh Eilert's talked about how the team's been down before today's game. So to be able to, for them,
it seems like the resume is already shot. Honestly, no matter what you do.
Yeah. There's too many. It would be different if they didn't have so many bad losses. But even the Oklahoma State loss is technically a bad loss. So just for them to hold their heads high and have that confidence and still feel motivated that they can make some magic happen and maybe play their best basketball going into this conference tournament. It's interesting to see that.
Yeah. And honestly, we've talked about this before. I threw it on social media just to reply to somebody. With as asinine as the last year has been for the basketball program, going from the Huggins drama to now, and they've dealt with every adversity you could imagine, from a Hall of Fame head coach career ending the way it did in really the worst way you could imagine, to the transfer portal, re-recruiting again, battling with the NCAA, suspension, injury, to get here. A weird dark horse Big 12 tournament win would almost be fitting to cap off the 30 for 30 that'll be made about this past year in Mountaineer basketball. It almost feels like no one's going to predict it, but they finally got the crew. They know they can win games when they're playing well. They don't always play that well, but the tournament is really looking like you play your best for a week and you don't know. But they are in a situation where, unlike even of years past that haven't been the best of seasons, not even getting to the final probably isn't even enough. I mean, this team is going to have to legit win the conference tournament, which, despite all the history and the great history that has been Mountaineer basketball at times, it would be the first Big 12 title and arguably the best of the conference titles, maybe with the 2010 one from the Big East when it was a gauntlet. But what a weird way to get it. I mean, that would just be insane. Yeah. It would really, really be insane. And then that would be the 1 year that the NCAA tournament, it wouldn't even matter whether you win or lose by 40 if you get that ring off of this past year. So I guess I kind of will flip it in a serious note off of that comment. We've seen the Mountaineers steal a game when they weren't at their best, but we've also seen Jesse Edwards play his best game as a Mountaineer after being hurt his first game back in the starting lineup. We've seen Battle now go through a roller coaster ride where he was scoring 30 points after dealing with the NCAA, and now he's struggling, but they weren't even winning when he was scoring 30 points, and now they get this win when he's hot and cold. Same thing a little bit with Kurt Krisha, and everybody else, in a way, is kind of stepping up a bit off the bench, even though we've seen a roller coaster with the bench too. What is the ceiling for this team? I think we all can agree the resume is so shot. You have 2 bye game losses. You have the Oklahoma State loss. You have the UCF loss, really, really bad, even though it was on the road. If you don't win the conference tournament, you're not getting in the NCAA, even if you win out really the regular season, because the resume is too shot. It is just, there's too many holes there. They're going to look at the overall resume, whether it's fair or not. That's what they do for teams. And it's hard for anyone to really get excited about anything else besides the NCAA when it's West Virginia basketball and the history there. But what is the ceiling of this team playing together? Can they make a run in the Big 12 tournament, regardless of winning it? Can you foresee a crazy Disney movie where they do win 2 or 3 games? What would have to happen to make that happen? And are we seeing flashes of that ability? And maybe even a situation where, dare I say, other teams and other coaches and other media members are going to start saying, I don't want to play the Mountaineers right now, even though their season's over. This is a weird, dangerous team.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to play West Virginia at all this season just based off of they're so unpredictable.
Right, you don't
Seems
know.
like one game they play their best basketball and they beat Kansas, and then I mean the next day they, even though they were shorthanded at the time, they go and lose a Monmouth at home. So
right.
they've just had such a weird season, and all the coaches have talked about it. Like it's one of the most unique scouts for every single one of them. Even now, like West Virginia finally gets their entire team on the court, and it's the end of January. But it's hard to predict their ceiling at all. But I think like a safe bet would be just getting a bye in the Big 12 tournament, because now it moves to the ACC style, 14 teams. So you got that extra day now. West Virginia, I think their ceiling, they could avoid that 11 to 14 seed in the Big 12, have to play on that Tuesday, and instead would save rest for one day, play Wednesday.
Yeah.
And that could be another unique situation with if West Virginia stole a conference title bid, is if they get on a roll here and they climb in the standings, but they're still under 500, they could get a day or two with the buys and just getting a higher seed in the conference. So that could be another unique aspect that they could handle off of. But they just have too many losses at this point. They have 13 losses. If they lose in the Big 12 tournament, that's 14. Right. And then who knows, even if they won out until Kansas City, they would still have 13, 14 losses. So you're creeping in, creeping out. You're on the bubble at least, but their ceiling is getting a bye in Kansas City and just saying, screw it, let's just play basketball, see what happens.
That has to be the mentality of really screw it and let's just play. That really probably should have been the mentality weeks ago, and maybe it really was the mentality. And again, it would just be the weirdest way to win that first Big 12 tournament title if they would pull it off. But maybe there could be a path. And the weirdest thing about college basketball versus, say, college football, even with the expanded playoff, this is still unique. That's going to be special, and why there can be movies made about Cinderella stories. The overall record, if they would run through and win the Big 12 tournament, the overall record in the bye game losses would not matter. They would be in. It would be ludicrous. It would be 2 bye game losses for an historic program to get in the tournament would be insane. But if they run through and win the Big 12 tournament, the NCAA would got to find a way. They would put them in. They got to put them in there somewhere. They would be in. So that is the beauty of March and why some do call it March Madness. Now, getting our analyst hat on a little bit here throughout the rest of this show, they won this game with Edwards being the straw that stirs the drink here because they had to, and he dominated double-double, 25 points, 10 boards. Edwards does that. They probably can win most nights as long as the others can even shoot half effectively. But we've seen a real roller coaster ride shooting from Capricia, from Battle, and we've said before that if they're not hot shooting, this team doesn't have a chance because we weren't expecting this from Edwards every game, and you still maybe can't expect this from Edwards every game. But because they've been cold, and even Eilert having to kind of pull back Battle in his minutes a little bit and what happened in the first half, should he, or do you foresee Eilert flipping back to a game plan of the fall and saying, even though the Stars are now on the floor with him, and before they weren't, we're going to run this offense through Edwards because we have to, and he's the only player that actually is dominating out there, and kind of go back to the game plan from the fall? Would that make sense? Do you think maybe he'll do that, or is he going to wait and see a little bit more and if the shooters can get hot? Schematically, could this game change his mind the rest of the year because they won thanks to Edwards and really him alone?
I think it would be smart for them to do that. Play slow, go through Slazinski and
Yeah, that's
Edwards
what
again.
I mean. Right.
But I think it's almost nearly impossible for them to do that just based off of the guards they brought back. Like, it only worked when they had Kobe Johnson, Seth Wilson, Ofri Neve in the backcourt. But now you have Kirk Risa, Battle, Farrakhan, who they all need to play fast to some extent.
But what if they're
especially
not hitting
Risa.
shots and their numbers are the same as Kobe Johnson and Wilson, etc.? I mean, it's an exaggeration, but
luckily for them, like Krisa shot okay tonight.
Yeah.
He shot really well against Oklahoma State, 6 threes.
He did.
Slazinski shot well too. If they have at least 2 of 4 of Krisa, Battle, Slazinski, Farrakhan at least
it's still
producing.
Yeah.
It's still better than before. I just think I can't see them going back to playing slow, like really slow, like Virginia slow. I can't see that happening again for the rest of the season, just based on who they brought back. But should they do that, and should they focus on winning games like that again? Yes, because it did work. It worked more than the last month of trying to get everybody to play together and find a new team identity. Yeah, the gelling.
the quote-unquote gelling. When is that over?
The gelling took a month, and it was expected. But at the same time, this team still somehow found ways to beat Kansas, Texas, Cincinnati. So
they did.
They have good wins. They just it's too.
No
they have so many losses at this point. It's hard to turn that around.
That's the thing, and they have so many good wins. But not only do they have a lot of losses, I think if you're 8-13 and you don't have the bye game losses and you don't have as bad of losses, like you don't lose by double digits, even if you still lose these bad games, it feels a little bit better. I mean, the committee is still going to look at the record, but we saw West Virginia get in last year with under 20 wins. Granted, still well above 500, and they didn't have 2 bye game losses that are on the resume despite being a depleted roster. Like, they do count to this season. They just do. But really honing in on Battle now, because he was the player that was the focal point, and many thought, okay, you went out over the NCAA, Battle can be the savior. He maybe can be the MVP of this team, even over Kirk Risha. Let Edwards kind of do his thing, but Battle is going to take you as far as you're going to go. They now are able to win when Battle's not really shooting, and Battle with 10 in this game, 2 against Oklahoma State. That was just a wolf game for him, maybe worst game as a Mountaineer or worst game of his college career, really. UCF 5, and he did have 23 against Kansas, 12 prior to that against Oklahoma, 14, 21. I'm going backwards here, 4. And then there's the streak of the 24, 29, and 29. So since he was red hot with those 3 straight games where he flirted with 25 or 30 points, he has been really hot and cold. And since the Kansas game, 5, 2, and 10. So they won this game. But what do they do to get him going? How much longer can this go with him throwing those kind of numbers up? Obviously, shooters are going to get cold. But what's going on with Battle in particular? Because this cannot continue or else they're going to start losing more games.
Yeah, with Raekwon, I think it's a couple things. It's getting in foul trouble every single first half. He can't ever get anything really going into that first half because he always picks up 2 quick fouls. And then Eilert will sit him on the bench for the majority of the half.
And that's kind of the story of this one a little bit.
Yeah. And I think it's also just some of his shot selection. He's taking a lot of deep 2s, fadeaways, long 3-pointers from the logo, and he's shown he can hit these shots. But when you're shooting these low percentage shots, deep 2s or deep 3s from the logo, you're going to be like a baseball player. You're gonna be in slumps, or you're gonna be red hot, asking for the ball every possession. But now I think what could get interesting is trying to figure out, should West Virginia run the offense through Battle or Edwards, and I think it's just going to depend on the game, depend on the opponent, the matchup, etc. And plus, obviously, who's shooting well.
Where you get really funky and do a through Kirk Creashaw, like a Russell Westbrook situation. Where, where it's like,
wild card.
Me again. That's not going to be what they're going to do. But yeah, it's hard to say run it through Battle with him shooting like this.
Yeah, obviously tonight you run it through Edwards, even though he struggled a little bit in the first half. The Battle struggled the majority of the game, and he hit a huge 3 in the final minute. And he was able to draw a couple. He was able to draw a couple fouls from shooting 3s, so he's able to get to the line well. But he struggled over the last couple weeks, I think, in finding consistency. But with the shots he's taking, he's gonna turn it over again at some point, and it won't be a slump anymore.
Yeah, you do look at this game a little bit different than the prior two, because he hit that 3 late. He was able to get over foul trouble and hit some 10 points, but these were big 10 points. Like, without him, if he went to 2 and 5, they wouldn't have won this game. He was critical, especially at the end of this game, but it just can't be this of the last week again. I don't know if Edwards can do this every single night when maybe he's still not 100%, and West Virginia has lost even when Carcrecia's scoring points, so they need them together, and we'll see moving forward. It could also be that Battle uses that 3 at the end to kind of get out of this slump. You mentioned a baseball comparison. Well, 3 for 10 for baseball, you're going to the Hall of Fame. 3 for 10 for basketball, you're going to have some trouble. So that's the problem here, the hot and cold. But when he gets hot, we've seen when he gets hot, he really has high ceilings. I'm going to throw this to you because we actually do have a chatter here. And I believe the answer, it's 2. But Matthew wants to know, do we have 2 or 3 quad 4 losses? Is it just the 2 bye games, or is there another quad 4 in there?
So it's the Monmouth game,
right?
And then it's Radford. So 2 quad 4 losses.
That's what I thought.
Then
yeah.
You also have 2 quad 3 losses. Somehow now K-State dropped down to a quad 3 loss at home, and then the Oklahoma State game on Saturday is a quad 3. So technically 4 losses. 2 that are quad 4, 2 quad 3.
Yeah, so 4 bad ones is what you're trying to say. Yeah. But yeah, so there's 2 quad 4. Generally speaking, having 1 with a losing record is the backbreaker. That's it for you, even if you're great in Ken Palm. And I think, to paint this picture too, the difference of last year versus this year, and obviously they won more last year. This year they arguably have some bigger wins, even though they were more competitive overall last year. They did make the tournament last year with a better record. Is last year in the losses, the Ken Palm sometimes would even raise the Mountaineers, wouldn't drop them because they really benefited from a strength of schedule, and they were very competitive in all of the games, even in losses, whether it be home or on the road. They played really well at the beginning of the season where they had a great record, and they did well in Portland, and you were out there, and they were able to impress outside of the conference against teams. And again, Ken Palm is all about that. Even if you don't win, if you're impressive and competitive in a game that you're not favored in, they will not drop you. That was the story of the season last year, which is why they made the NCAA tournament. This year, not only do they have multiple quad 4 losses and other bad losses that didn't exist last year, but the record's even worse. And Ken Palm has been anything but a friend to the Mountaineers this year. I mean, they're barely raising even after a win, and they crater when they lose. It's not a little drop. They were barely even on the radar until the turn of the year in 2024. So it's way too much to make up. And yeah, they didn't have a whole roster last year. You did. You had time to gel, but that's just the NCAA is not going to worry about that. The committee's not going to care. It's the overall resume, and it's just not good enough, and there's not much more time for it. We'll see what they do, though. If they gel and if there's a ceiling, they got to play. They got to play with a mentality of just screw it and see what happens. Now, speaking of seeing what happens, West Virginia does win this game over Cincinnati, 69-65, 8th win of the year, 3-5 now in conference play. Ethan's game recap is over there at WV Sports now, as well as the reaction from all of you, the fans that I put up there, but also from Josh Eilert and company about what happened through this game. But moving ahead now for the Mountaineers, it's another ranked opponent. They have a couple of those wins, bumping team even out of the ranking, but BYU also at home. They're going to get a couple days before this one. And then Texas looks for revenge. TCU, that's one on the road as well. Baylor, UCF, maybe they look for revenge against UCF. Iowa State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, etc. And then you eventually play TCU and Cincinnati to close off the regular season. But looking at that BYU game, what's the path to win that game? How do you think that game is going to unfold? What does BYU even bring to the table for a fan that maybe doesn't follow the Cougars? Because they're ranked, you see the number in front of them, but BYU is not traditionally an historic program like the Mountaineers in terms of basketball. So how are they good this year, and what can West Virginia do to beat them?
Yeah, BYU's kind of been one of the surprise teams just overall this season, not just in conference, but out of conference. Yeah. They're top 10 in Ken Palm, top 25 on both sides of the floor, offensive and defensively. But they're really categorized as an elite offense. Honestly, no, with how the seasons went, like West Virginia plays, even if they play poorly at home, they still are somehow able to squeak with some of these wins.
Or being like at home is a little different situation. Yeah, they wouldn't have beat Kansas on the road, even though they played well there in the past, but not this team. Yeah.
Yeah. If they went to Provo, they would have lost by 20, 25 points. But with BYU coming to Morgantown,
right,
I could see West Virginia getting that win too, just off of they are able to win at home.
What's the game plan, though? Play, is it going through Edwards? Can they do it with Edwards and size? Do they need these shooters? What does BYU do well? Because this is a new team to the conference, relatively speaking, as well in the Big 12, and a much better team and a much better season. They've dealt with tough places to play. It's not like they can't go on the road, but it is a cross country trip. What type of game plan will beat BYU, or in order to beat them, do you have to avoid what we've seen in the last couple of games? Because this early foul trouble for the shooters, and then Edwards starting off slow and having to have come to Jesus meetings, that could mean you're down by 20 points, I'd imagine, to BYU, and then you're done.
Yeah, I think West Virginia has to go through Edwards again against BYU. They have a lot of wing players, kind of combo guards and forwards.
Okay.
And then a big center. But what West Virginia needs to do is at least hang in there with BYU on rebounding. I wouldn't necessarily say they have to out rebound BYU, because they really don't out rebound many teams. But just being able to stick around, kind of like tonight with Cincinnati, get out rebounded, but at least kind of make it competitive. and if they shoot well again, they could hang in there with BYU, go kind of toe for toe with their offenses. And BYU's a really good passing team, just spreading the floor out and being
Right.
able to. It seems like all their players know where their teammate's going to be 2 passes ahead. So if West Virginia can get turnovers, and they can play the transition game pretty well with Edwards back now, with Battle too. So if they can create turnovers, get BYU to make mistakes on the road, and take advantage of that, and then as well, at least hang in there with BYU on rebounding, and with the home court advantage, they could upset BYU as well.
And they won this game without really hanging around rebounding wise. That normally is what Eilert always preaches. We got to at least be more competitive and try to hang in there rebounding wise. We've even heard Battle say, I'm not a rebounder, obviously, but I got to go from averaging 2 a game to 4 or 5 or 6 to try to pick up the slack for others. Edwards being back now maybe fixes that. But you don't figure to lose the rebounding battle convincingly and win if you're the Mountaineers when Battle only scores 10, but maybe you can when Jesse Edwards throws up 25 and 10 and 4. So when he puts a spread up there like that, I mean, that's a Giannis spread. You throw that up, then okay, a lot of things change, and Edwards played like he was the best player on the floor for either team. If he plays like he's the best player on the floor for either team, then the Mountaineers maybe do have a chance to surprise somebody, and that would be a really, really solid big win for the Mountaineers. That if you're trying to make up for the quad 4 losses we talked about earlier, that would be one that you really have to have, and probably the next real winnable game against a quality opponent, because you have to figure Texas is going to get revenge against you. Like teams that you did beat that you're going to play again, it's hard to imagine you're going to sweep a season series. But BYU at home, that might be out there to kind of make up some ground. Anything else from the players or anybody else in the post-game session, or any final thoughts here? The Mountaineers do get the win. The record's still not good. There's a reason why fans are still not really singing country roads yet after victories. But this was the first game the actual starting lineup all started, and they did win it despite not playing well. That's a glass half full take if you want one.
Yeah, I think the common or the casual fan is still really not bought into this team, and understandably so. But it's at least interesting to see how they have their whole team back. What can Josh Eilert kind of manage, like going from Battle to Edwards? Like, who do you go to? Where does Kreisa fit in with trying to feed Battle or feed Edwards, or even Slazinski or himself? So, even though they're 8-13, they're still competitive in the Big 12, which is pretty surprising,
Right.
especially with how the season started. So, if nothing else, they may not make the NCAA tournament. They probably won't make the NCAA tournament, but at least it will at least be an interesting ride, and it won't be boring until Kansas City in March.
Yeah, and guess what happens? We didn't actually bet on this, but we jokingly threw this out there. One more win and they match the football team. So we
Yep.
thought there was a chance they wouldn't get there. One more win and they match the football team. And if you want to argue the football team's 9th win was a quote unquote postseason game because it was a bowl game, then they already have matched the football team. Football team had 8 wins in the regular season. They won 9 for the bowl. This team now 8-13. The next one's 9. Obviously, in a basketball season, that's nothing to write home about. Like maybe that could be a successful football season with a lot less games. But jokingly, off of what you're saying, there was legit concern that they would not get the double-digit wins as recent as a week or two ago. They've had upset wins since then. They've also had bad losses that could make this record even better than it is now, and they do get this one. Unbelievable nonetheless. They do win it, though. They do beat Cincinnati. And also, I think Ethan will echo this. If anybody still doesn't want to even get on the Mountaineer basketball bandwagon, at least for the men, and you're already done with this year, no matter what they're doing, you can go watch another brand of Mountaineer basketball. The women are definitely headed to the NCAA tournament. They could pretty much lose out, and they're going to the NCAA tournament. They are a true juggernaut, not only in the Big 12, but maybe nationally. They are ranked. We will see. The sky could be the limit for them. And this is a wide open year in women's college basketball, maybe more so than we've seen in 20 years. So Mark Kellogg, first year, got to give him some love on this show. Maybe we'll do a post game after one of their games because they deserve it at this point. And we do have coverage there from Griffin Floyd, game recaps, and even much more on WV Sports Now. So the Mountaineers do win it. Ethan, I'll let you go there. The Mountaineers do win this one 69-65. They beat Cincinnati, 8-13 on the year now. They get their third conference win. What a weird 3 wins, 2 ranked wins, one of them over Kansas, and then, of course, a win over their old Big East rival in the Bearcats. It all went through Jesse Edwards, 25-10-4. They need more from the rest, but they got the lineup back. We'll see if this actually now can build into something and maybe make it a night where you can sing Country Roads and actually mean it before the end of the year, and then maybe they can complete the Disney movie and do something in the Big 12 tournament. Probably not, but nonetheless, the Mountaineers do win on this night.